Welcome to my lecture series called All But the Kitchen Sink, where I throw everything at you except for the kitchen sink, and if I get desperate, I have the kitchen sink readily available. This talk today is about the intersection of local causality and non-local causality. Another potential title would be the intersection of unity and diversity. A third and final potential title is the intersection of right now and eternity. I've also given this lecture under the title of mechanistic causality and epiphany, or the intersection of those two. So before the title exceeds the duration of the talk itself, let me begin with the components of the idea today. The first component is culture. The next component is behavior. This component is the epigenome, which we'll have to discuss a little bit. It's not a commonly known thing. The genome, which I believe we're all familiar with, and then the phenotype, this bag of cells, such as the one you see today, and that bag of cells, based on its state, will elicit some behavior. So the linkage and chain of causality here, and this is local causality that we're going to talk about. This is domino sort of causality that happens locally, is that culture can influence behavior and change behavior. So this culture, books, ideas, music, belief systems, can change people's behavior. And then as people's behavior begins to change, it can go back and change this body of information called culture. Furthermore, people's behavior can modify the epigenome of those around them, and in some instances of themselves as well. The epigenome has the capacity to turn on and off genes in the genome so that the functioning set of genes that build the phenotype change. And the body, the physical body, can, and its changed state, go change the world of behavior. So that's the general set of linkages between components. And we're going to take a cycle through this for the Germanic tribes, but let me first describe the epigenome. It's not a well-known thing in this. I believe the others are all well-known. The classic, this was on Nova, the science show on PBS, the classic example of the genome is you have two mother rats about ready to have offspring. One mother rat is very loving and caring and tactile with her babies. They cry and she soothes them a lot. The other mother rat is hands off. I'll give you a little milk, go get a job. And if they cry, she just says, go ahead and cry. The two mother rats have their offspring, and the offspring are mixed between the two mother rats. After a few months, the offspring are measured for cortisol level. You go to the offspring of the loving and caring mother, who raised half of her own and half of her neighbor's offspring, and you scare those baby rats and measure cortisol. And what we see in the offspring of the loving tactile mother is that the cortisol spikes up with danger, and then it tapers off as the danger goes away, a normal cortisol spike. If you go, and then they went over to the baby rats that were raised by the hands-off mother, scared them, and measured cortisol levels. Cortisol levels went through the roof and stayed up for weeks. Now, what does this indicate? This indicates that the behavior of the mother would change the epigenome of the offspring to either turn on the cortisol regulation gene or turn off the cortisol regulation gene. And the absence of soothing, the absence of behavior, can also cause the epigenome to change. So the epigenome is changed by behavior or by the absence of behavior, and the absence of behavior is actually behavior itself. So let me walk through this loop once for the Germanic tribes. There is a piece of Germanic culture that says that if you pick up a baby who's 60 days old, who's crying, you're going to spoil the baby. If the baby's younger than a couple of months, go ahead and pick them up, soothe them. If their baby's 2 months old and is crying, let them cry, let them cry, let them cry. Well, you can probably guess where we're going with this, that cultural value, which is expressed by the mother or the grandmother to the pregnant mother, grandma says, okay, mom, do not pick up your child now because your child is now 2 months and 1 day old. Let them cry. Because if you pick them up, you're going to ruin them. So the culture says, don't pick up a crying baby. The behavior of the mother is to sit there and let the baby cry, which is a hard thing to do for mom, but she says to herself, oh, I don't want to ruin my baby, so I'm just going to let him cry. Hours and hours and hours, let him cry. So the mom, who sits there against her natural desires and lets the baby cry, is changing the epigenome, this biochemical layer that people and animals have, that has the capacity to turn genes on and off. That behavior of letting the baby cry causes the epigenome of the baby to go in and turn off the gene that regulates cortisol. And that builds a body that is seething with cortisol at the slightest risk of danger. And the cortisol stays up for a long time. Now, bodies that are seething with cortisol exhibit a behavior that's a little bit paranoid and very much us versus them, and is willing to follow leaders. And if the leader of the Germanic tribe comes up and says, oh, we need to build this big wall around the city, you better start helping us, everyone pitches in because these bad guys out there. And actually, when you think about it, the Germanic tribes attacked and counterattacked and counterattacked each other for a long, long time, and didn't become a united Germany with an actual government for it was 18 something before the Germanic tribes came out of the Stone Age. So Germany is the quintessential example of this. I believe all cultures have this going on. Germany just happens to be a very clear example of a particular gene that controls a particular flight or fight hormone called cortisol, which has a big effect on behavior. So you can see the Darwinian survival value of this in that if you have this cultural loop going on, and you have a culture that's being attacked and counterattacked and counterattacked, and when you're attacked by your neighboring Germanic tribe, the attack can go on for months. These sieges would go on and on and on. That there would be real survival value in having a population of people who at the slightest danger get this cortisol spike, are able to stay up all night, have this super energy, are willing to conform to leaders, follow leaders, and have this big us-them dichotomy going on, and we're the good guys and all of our problems are caused by the bad guys. You can see that the Darwinian value of this loop to the Germanic tribes is fairly significant, and that it kind of makes sense that this loop would go on and have some value. Now, given that this loop goes around for a while and we get a population of people with increasing levels of cortisol, it's not surprising about World War I and World War II happening back to back. And now, instead of talking about this loop in the context of an entire cultural system, let's talk about the same loop in the context of an individual. And we'll talk about one individual, Harry, and we'll talk about another one later called Joe. And this Harry is Harry Truman, President Harry Truman. But before he became president, let's talk about Harry and his value system prior to becoming president and his little history on his life. My family lived in Kansas. Harry's family lived in Missouri, right across the line, and the people on the Kansas side were anti-slavery, and Harry and his family were all pro-slavery, and as Harry was a young man, he was racially biased. Absolutely no question about it. And that was a bit of a problem. Harry's life changed significantly when a behavior from the Germanic tribes smashed into Harry's epigenome, and I'm going to call this behavior WW1. And Harry was in combat in World War I, and when he came back from that experience as a young man being in combat, he said, I was a changed man, absolutely a changed man. And he was, because young men who go into battle experience a change in their epigenome, and it changes the set of genes that are active, and it changes that physical chunk of meat called their body, and their body changes their behavior. And Harry came back from World War I with a different perspective on blacks and whites than he had prior to World War I. And actually, when Harry became president, he desegregated the armed services, which was wildly unpopular at the time. As a matter of fact, the bullet that was shot at him, it didn't hit him, but Harry knew that when he put blacks and whites together in the armed services, that was going to be very unpopular, and there was an attempt to kill him because of that. But that's okay. Harry knew it would be unpopular, and doing unpopular things is part of life, because he was doing the right thing. So Harry experiences World War I. It changes who he is fundamentally, and then at the end of World War II, Harry got to have two encounters with the Germanic tribes. One in the trenches during the battles of World War I, and another one as commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the world. So at the end of World War II, Harry's sitting there thinking, well, what are we going to do? Germans have surrendered. Well, FDR's guys, who were left over from FDR's time, came up and they had a plan about what to do with Germany after they had surrendered. They said, let's have Einstein and his buddies build a few more of those bombs, and we'll go bomb all of the major cities, and we'll pave them flat. And we'll put a sign up that says, this is what happens when you do bad things. And Harry was thinking about that, kind of wavering back and forth, thinking, geez, yeah, I guess we could do that, because World War I and World War II were pretty bad things. I guess we could do what FDR's guys wanted to do. FDR's guys were Harvard, Yale, Princeton kind of guys, never served in combat, but were very smart guys. But their epigenomes as a teenager had never been challenged, and they hadn't been changed. Now Harry, on the other hand, was raised as a dirt farmer who was in combat, and Harry's epigenome changed his genome significantly. Furthermore, Harry understood history fairly well. So Harry's sitting there thinking back and forth, geez, what are we going to do at the end of World War II with Germany? And Harry said in his memoir that he got this epiphany that I, Harry Truman, farmer from Missouri, have the capacity to do the largest single instance of the Sermon on the Mount in the history of all history. Now that's a big deal, because the Sermon on the Mount is considered the quintessential statement of behavior of the human race. And here Harry is saying, I am positioned he gets this flash that says, you can do the largest instance of the Sermon on the Mount in the history of all history. Because Harry had the bomb, and when you're the only guy with the bomb, you're the most dominant, powerful force on the planet. Yet he was going to do the broadest act of forgiveness that had been done in history. So Harry gets this idea, and Harry says, hold on. Let's elicit a behavior called the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan is going to give them billions and billions of dollars. And furthermore, we're going to give them the forgiveness of a nation. And we're going to rebuild them in a way that no victor has ever done to the vanquished in the history of history. Whew. Good idea, Harry. Really, really, really good idea. Because he was sitting there leaning for a while thinking, do I do what FDR's got Harvard guys want to do? And then kaboom, he gets this flash that says, no, we're going to give them the Marshall Plan, we're going to give them forgiveness, we're going to give them democracy and constitutional government, we're going to give them free market capitalism, and we're going to give them hope for a better tomorrow. Now, normally, the victors have retribution and slavery and suffering in mind for the vanquished. And Harry said, I've got a new idea. So Harry gave them billions of dollars to rebuild them. And he knew when he did that he was doing probably, and Harry was not an outlandish, egotistical person. You could make the statement that is, to this day, that is the largest single instance of the Sermon on the Mount in the history of all history. Now, and that it happened because Harry was changed. Harry was changed by the behavior of the Germanic tribes. I'll call Nazi Germany a tribe. That might be generous. He was changed by this cultural loop into being a completely new person. He and his entire greatest generation, World War I and World War II, these people were universally changed to be completely different people who were loving and kind and forgiving and self-sacrificing people. And Harry knew that he would be hated for forgiving the Germans. He knew he would be hated for integrating the armed services. He knew he would be hated for proposing national health insurance. He knew these were all things that were wildly unpopular. But he also knew that the judgment of history and the judgment of eternity are what matter. So, Harry also said in his memoirs that he knew that Germany, at the end of World War II, this is WW2 here, knew at the end of World War II that Germany would be split. And that Joseph Stalin and his culture would control half of Germany. And that Harry and the United States of America would control the other half of Germany. And Harry said in his memoirs, he knew way before anybody else that communism would fall. And that it would fall in the lifetime of people who were alive during his time. Now, Harry didn't like communism. And when he said communism will fall in your lifetime, no one believed him because, for example, we had just built a bomb shelter in our backyard. The only question was how thick to build the walls and the bomb shelter in your backyard. No one was thinking that the Soviet Union would fall in our lifetime. Harry said, the Soviet Union will fall in your lifetime. Now, why would he say that? Harry said that because he knew that West Germany would be thriving, vibrant, alive, dynamic, hopeful, and that Joseph Stalin would give them retribution, starvation level food, and a governmental system that did not trust the people to make their own political decisions. They did not trust the people to have a relationship with God. And he knew that East Germany would be black and white and hopeless. And he knew that West Germany would be technicolor, full of hope, and he knew that side-by-side comparison of communism and freedom and forgiveness would clearly make the point that communism, while it has a philosophy that sounds a little bit like the teachings of Jesus, its practical implementation is not remotely close to that. So Harry also knew that this barbed wire on the wall in Berlin would be another source of the fall of communism, in that the people in East Germany who heard the siren song of freedom calling them and tried to get over the barbed wire and were shot by the guards with their bodies hanging on the barbed wire, that the pictures of the bodies of East Germans hanging in the barbed wire halfway to freedom and fully to eternity, that those pictures would show the entire world that communism was a failed system, and that freedom and democracy and forgiveness were a completely different world. And you would see no bodies hanging on the barbed wire trying to go from west into east. And then the gravy on Harry's theory was that the guards who were sitting there guarding the barbed wire and shooting the people on the barbed wire as they tried to find freedom, because the human spirit cries out for freedom. That when the guards who were sitting there shooting the people threw down their guns and ran for West Germany, that those pictures would also indicate the failure of communism versus freedom. And then, of course, the communists had to bring in guards to guard the guards so that they wouldn't run across. And then when the guards and the guards of the guards would both make a signal, they would both throw down their guns and they would both run to the west, that picture would further indicate to the world that there is a failed system and there is a successful system. And it is day and it is night. And it is clear as it can possibly be. So, the moral of the story is that the world changes through these interdependent local causality domino chain links that are completely interwoven. Totally, 100% completely interwoven. And there are these moments when epiphany happens and the world changes in a flash, because inside of someone's head this inspiration just flashes. For example, the scenario that you see on the board came to me in a flash, and it was my job then to document what had just flashed into my head. Mozart was the same way. Boop, the symphony would come, and then it was his job to write down the notes, but it was merely a transcribing job. This non-local causality had happened in a simultaneous fashion, and it's just a question of then writing it down in sequential steps. That the world changes through this interdependent, interwoven local causality domino chain, recursive, scale invariant, fractal sort of a way. And then also the world changes when an epiphany happens that says, go with FDR, go with with FDR's guys and their ideas, or boom, don't, because there's this different way to go about this. The world changes through both local causality and non-local causality. And in my next lecture, we'll talk about Aramaic concept of Shem and Shemaiah, and how those two things influence each other, and it's precisely this same issue. That in that lecture, we'll also talk about quantum mechanics and linear behavior models. Well, I'm starting to throw the kitchen sink at you now, but in the next lecture, we'll talk about Aramaic and contemporary physics, and how those two things also have a model very similar to this model, where linear causality and nonlinear causality come together to produce what we see today. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate your watching, and I'll see you next time.